watch, especially if they can't show up today. That way I don't have to take minutes. I probably still will release some sort of written description of what we talked about today.
Or just send out the transcript. Maybe that's the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. No, there is no agenda, really. The question is, as we were just starting to discuss, who's going to be PI on a proposal, the proposal, whatever the big proposal is going to be from the group that's part of our responsibilities as an ideas lab group. And there are a bunch of associated questions with that. Who's going to do what? What's the timeline? And so forth. But leadership,
right?
Who's PI?
And we want to figure this out now because John, you want to set up IRBs for the interviews, and that's
yeah. So so this came up because I talked to our IRB office last week, and they recommended that whomever is going to be the PI for the main project, their institution should also be the main office. The IRB office should also be the one that submits the protocol for evaluation. And that's at San Jose State. That's how it operates. So they said that possibly other campuses it may be different. And the reason for that, I think, is to make everything line up, because it makes it less complicated later if everything lines up by PI. Because otherwise it's complicated. Yeah.
So even if you're doing the interviews, you would submit the IRB through, let's say, if Joe was PI, you would submit it through CSU Fresno. Is that what you mean?
Correct. So if Joe was the PI, let's use Joe as the example. It would be through the Fresno IRB where the IRB submission is submitted. Then it would be through Joe as a PI for the IRB as well. But I can imagine that. I mean, I can work with Greg and Julene on the IRB itself and submit it, through the Fresno IRB.
Okay.
Office.
Yeah.
It's more like on paper the PI is coming from the IRB is coming from the PI institution.
Yeah.
And then once that happens, then I would the people that are doing the interviews would do a reliance agreement essentially with Fresno, so that we're either co-PIs or something on the IRB, allowing the other personnel to do the work from other places. So I think it should be straightforward, but I don't think it puts more work on the PI. I mean, a little bit more work because they have to submit it, but other than that.
Right. But you and John are.
What was that?
But you basically would actually put together the protocol and all that sort of thing, and it's just a matter of clicking a button or whatever it might be.
Correct, and it would be based on the institution's requirements, which might be a little different with each institution. So I would look at the Fresno IRB requirements and make sure that we get all the documents in place for that. So the question is who the PI would be, so that we can start that process essentially.
Got it. Yeah.
And I think initially, when I was talking to Joe earlier, like for this conversation, who would be the appropriate PI? I know that I would assume that for the main submission later, that the PI that has the most expertise in the area in which we're submitting, which is like soil microbiome, should be the PI. So whoever that is, I believe would be the most appropriate. So I guess the discussion would be, who would that be? Or is there something? Right, that's the question. And I guess just with 4 of us here, that I don't know if we can narrow it down, or do we have to wait until the larger group can get together, which will be very difficult, I think. I don't know what would be the best process moving forward. And I don't know what the timeline would be for this. With IRBs, I feel like depending on the institution, the type of work that we're doing is relatively inert, I guess. So we're not doing any interventions or anything. So it should be a pretty smooth process. So I don't necessarily think that timing is going to be that critical, but if we want to start collecting some data, sooner is better, obviously. So
right, absolutely. Well,
I don't know.
So in terms of who's got, go ahead, Joe.
Just about the IRB process. I've done quite a few IRB protocol submissions. I've done a lot of human subjects work. And usually you only need an IRB if you're going to publish the data you collect. That is, if you're just collecting data and you don't intend to share it with anybody, then you don't need to go through IRB approval. And so if we're using this, if we're using the data that we collect from farmers, for example, to help us understand the history of the plots of land that we would be studying, and that information is just for us for decision-making purposes,
then you wouldn't necessarily need it.
Then we don't need an IRB approval. If we're going to say, if we think though that we might have a conference presentation, you know, a poster, an oral presentation, or a publication that publishes sort of the data we would collect or some portion of it, that's when we would need an IRB approval.
Right, right. So I guess that will depend. So if we're using it for are we going to be using it for like pilot data, for example, or is this really just understanding a instrument? So I think it's definitely developing an instrument is definitely part of it. If we're going to use some of that data as pilot data, that would be categorized as publishing it in a sense, right? Although it's not technically publishing it.
You would be sharing it. So yes, it would be publishing.
So I would so I think with that, the safer side would be to go through IRB, and it wouldn't necessarily be. I don't feel like it's a big burden to do it.
No, it's not. It
would cover our basis to be able to use it, which I think would be good, versus trying to like go through all this work and not be able to use any of the work other than to say we have an instrument now that we're going to have to write IRB later anyways to do. Because what we can do is like have the IRB in, and we can always just expand it or add an amendment to it for the main project if it gets that far, which would actually, I feel like it's worth doing it. That is what I would
based
argue.
on my experience here at Cal Poly, I'm pretty certain that our IRB board would tell us, go ahead and get the approval, because even if you don't directly use the outcome of these interviews in your publications, one could argue that they play a significant role in the overall effort. As you said, it's not really that much of an overhead.
Yeah. I mean, that's what our IRB office said. Is like you should it's cover your bases, just submit it. But I guess so the question isn't about submitting; it's about where to submit it. I guess is the question.
Okay.
So I don't know. We're still at the beginning of that conversation, but I don't know if there's any thoughts. So as I was saying, I think maybe a soil microbiologist would be the best PI, but I don't think we have any soil microbiologists, right? But we have some general microbiologists in our group. So would a microbiologist be an appropriate PI for this? And I'm, maybe in that sense, I'm kind of selecting very specific people in that case, but and they're not on this conversation. So
isn't Isolde the only microbiologist that we have?
Yeah, I think for sure her. I'm not sure about the other people. I think I have to look at the profiles again to know, but so if Isolde is the only one, would she be willing to be the PI, I guess is the question.
I mean, my impression was that she's more interested in the water project, splitting off.
Right. So there's that question about that part too. So so kind of in a situation where we're not sure who would make the most sense. If it's not, I'm just trying looking at it from the other side, from the funder side. I guess if we don't have a soil microbiologist or microbiologist as a lead, does that weaken our argument to submit this or not?
I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a ton of bioinformatics involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of analyzing the data, we would definitely want a soil microbiologist on the project, and I don't think we have one. So that's probably on our to-do list is to get on as a co-PI. But as PI, I think we could put forward. Okay, neither one is here, so.
Yeah, exactly.
but either Nate or Bill, to me, would be the logical ones among our current group to put forward. Nate, because he's actually done some of this soil microbiology before and has the bioinformatics background. And Bill's brand new, but I mean, he's basically a bioinformatics person. And there's a certain strength to be basically putting up front, basically saying, hey, anyone can collect soil samples, but where this is really difficult is in sort of extracting data from the massive amount of sequence information we're going to use. That's what Bill does.
It's kind of like that aim 3 leading that third aim part of it, which is the main application part, actually, right? So, I think that makes sense. Whether or not Bill has the time or the,
right.
I mean, we should make it easier because he's at San Jose State too. So,
so
we can align.
I think we have to find a reasonable compromise between at least 3 different aspects. Of course, it should be somebody who is qualified from the domain expertise. And for example, I am not, so I'm completely out. I'm also not willing to put the effort into this, so that rules me out on 2 fronts. And so the willingness to put the effort in my opinion, is at least as critical as the expertise. And then the third one is also to some degree the kind of personality. Is that person a good leader? Is the person able to rally the troops and get everybody else to bring their best forward? And that's a tricky combination to find. And to be honest, off the top of my head, the person that comes to my mind right away would be Nate. But of course, we would have to ask him to see if he's willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that this might be an unusual proposal in that whoever ends up being the PI may not necessarily need to be the true leader of the group in a sense. Mm-hmm. Joe, you've been kind of like the organizer of this whole thing, but in a sense, I think, and you probably agree with me, you don't make sense as a PI because your whole publication sort of is not in this field.
Right.
Yet, my impression is that, if Joe's a co-PI instead of a PI, he's still going to kind of herd the cats, and Nate, even if he's not the PI, would still be heavily involved in the bioinformatics and such. So I guess, I'm willing to play, a pretty major role in this, but I have no desire to be PI. So if we can get others, and I think as a group we can get others to buy in on that, regardless of whether it's Bill or Nate or whoever, it doesn't mean that Bill's going to have to write 90% of the thing. It's just Bill has a CV that fits what we need, and he's the
right
leader.
Mm-hmm.
Or Nate. Nate would be just as good.
Yeah, it is just on paper, I believe. If we can agree that we just need to move it forward. It's on paper. We'll still have our major roles, as you said, Matt. Whether or not, so a question is, does anybody want to be PI, I guess, in the big group?
Yeah.
I guess that's the first question. I think everybody's kind of like stepping back from that, at least based on the 4 of us here. And I know Bill is brand new. It's his first couple months,
right?
As faculty, so which I know in itself is a challenging time. But and I think Nate has a lot of other projects going on too, from what he talks about. So, but it seems like I don't know. I guess it's worth asking those 2 guys if they're interested in it or not, and maybe that's the next step. And if they are interested, great. If they're not, we can maybe make the pitch to just agree that the PI is just in name in a sense, and it just makes the process easier if we can decide sooner. In my mind, as Matt said, Bill makes sense from based on his expertise and that he's at San Jose State. We can coordinate the IRB, like the practicality situation that makes it easier. But if there's other reasons that can override that, I can work with that as well. So maybe that's what we need to bring to the larger group. It's like, we're nominating these people that aren't on this call. Are they willing to step in? Are they okay either way? They don't mind doing it if they have to, kind of like getting that kind of sense. My guess is that my guess is that nobody else other than them is going to step into that role, at least voluntarily.
Well, Joe, you've been kind of taking on a leadership role, and I know that from your background, you're not the ideal PI, but if necessary, would you be willing to continue just as figurehead, even though you're not the best match from your expertise?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking a lot about.
Right.
Yeah, expertise-wise, I don't think I make sense as a PI. I tend to agree with, sounds like what we're coming to is a consensus, which is that we need to have a PI, at least in name, and that everybody else can shoulder much of the work of writing and everything else that needs to be done. So the only concern I have is selfish. What do I get out of it?
Right.
Even as a co-PI, if I was a co-PI and I was sort of the ringleader, is that really a valuable academic thing for me to spend my time doing if it doesn't further my research interests?
Right.
So for now, I'm happy to keep talking about the possibility of me playing some role. And I don't think it should be PI, definitely, just based on what we've talked about already. But I'm not ready to bow out yet. From the group, that is. Okay.
So, but it would take major convincing to get you to say, okay, I'm willing to do this.
It needs to intellectually involve me somehow, beyond what I've been doing currently, which is mostly scheduling and paperwork, and which is fine. It's something I enjoy doing, unfortunately. So that's why I've been doing it. But yeah, at some point in the near future, it's not going to make sense for me to keep doing this, playing this role.
Yeah.
Unless it becomes really clear to me what academic value I provide. Speaking of PIs, by the way, I will pitch the possibility that one of my colleagues might be a good addition to the group. I have no idea if she would be interested in PIing. I've talked to her briefly, just sort of. She's a microbiologist in our department here at Fresno State, and she has done some microbiome work. She's currently got a project, for example, studying the water microbiome in the Fresno Zoo, because I don't remember what the details are, something like they use reclaimed water to like put the water in the penguin exhibit or something like that. And so she's just having students go out and collect microbiome data. So she has some expertise in microbiology and partly in the soil as well. So she's also had collaborations with other people that have looked at microbiome stuff. So there are still, we could talk about it more in detail later if we need to, but that's another option, would be to bring in somebody else that we haven't had part of the group yet that would maybe be a PI.
We may have somebody who fits that category as well, Jean Davison. She's working with Nate anyway, and so the two of them seem to be involved in projects together. But to be honest, I also haven't approached her about this possibility.
Yeah. So it seems like it makes the most sense to stick with people we have.
Yeah. And
to start with, say, Nate maybe Nate or Bill.
Maybe
we will need to bring in expertise, I think, anyway.
Right.
Even if they're not PIs.
Yeah.
Maybe we could reach out to Nate and Bill, just shoot them an email and say, hey guys, you've been nominated. Would you be willing to do this?
Yeah.
If they both say no, then whoever this person that you have, Franz, at Cal Poly, who's currently collaborating with Nate, that could be a good fallback to approach. And Joe, your person could also be a good fallback. And ultimately, if we end up deciding in 3 months, whenever we're getting ready to submit this thing, that, we really do want that Cal Poly person to be the PI, even though we initially said Nate, well, there's going to be some extra paperwork to change IRB, but that's not the end of the world.
Right. Okay. So is that I guess we reached a point where, do we need to converse more about this at this point, or should we just reach out to them and see where we fall, I guess, in this? And maybe, I don't know if it's, maybe it is a direct email if not sent to them.
I think,
or maybe it's maybe it's a specific email to them, but maybe also a larger email to the bigger group if there's anybody interested in.
So the fact that we've reached consensus among the four of us does not necessarily mean it's consensus for the room.
Exactly.
Well, with I think what is there, or 12 or 11? I don't know. I don't know what the number situation is.
We're around 11.
I'm not sure we're at 4.
Yeah.
11. Yeah, got it. So we need 6 for majority, right? I guess.
And consent from whoever the nominee.
Yeah, that's pretty important. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So,
is it best to do this by email or some other way? Email's most efficient, and it's easiest to get everybody in the loop at the same time. It seems like it would be more convincing to do it in person or via Zoom, but obviously Zoom has issues because we can't get everybody on at the same time.
Right.
So pro and con. I think at some point we have to have a discussion about it. I don't think it's going to be easy to coordinate this via email. I agree. I think in the end, maybe we should start with an email.
Okay.
I mean, could this be a Slack thing, or I don't know? Is that too informal? Is that too casual of a way?
I don't know. I'm not a Slacker, so I'm not really sure if this is appropriate for that medium or not. But
I mean, maybe we could send out an email to the whole group saying that the 4 of us met, had this conversation, and we came up with the idea that Nate or Bill be potential PIs and name, and we'd like to schedule another meeting at a time when Nate and Bill can actually be present.
Yeah.
To discuss the idea.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
You folks want me to send that email?
I'll write it.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Shoot out that email to the group, and
if you want, I don't have to. I'm just offering the opportunity.
Oh, sorry. What? I didn't hear you. What did you say, Joe?
Oh, I was just saying I wasn't trying to take it away from anybody else. If somebody else wants to write the email, that's fine. I'm just offering my services in case it's necessary.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, no. You're in some ways it'd be good because you're our Zoom guru, so you could actually schedule the Zoom meeting.
Fair enough. Yep. So actually, what I will do is I'll draft the email. I'll send it to the 3 of you for your agreement or consent to the wording, and then I'll send it out.
To be honest, I'm worried. I trust you to compose this email.
Or that works too.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Do you know when we'll hear back from Susan? Anybody?
No idea. I keep thinking about that every other day or so. I would be surprised if we don't get the money.
Yeah,
I suspect they would not have offered the opportunity if they didn't have the money.
Yeah.
And I doubt they're going to be very strict about what we're asking.
Could have been just a checkbox or to move forward, right?
Yeah. That's my guess.
Any timing on the JGI one either? There wasn't, right?
No, there was a deadline. I don't know how quick the submission deadline. I don't know how they review them, how or when. So,
all right.
Something else that Bill might have insight on.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, that sounds
Any
good.
other scheduling, other questions, next steps beyond choosing a PI? We can definitely be starting to work on the big grant before we get to our in-person meeting in January.
Yeah, I mean, the trick is we don't really have an RFA yet to work off of.
Right.
For that soil microbiomes one. I mean, we can look back at old ones. I assume it'd be similar, but it's a little tricky to do a lot of work prior to that.
Yeah. I mean, I know some of you already know, but on Friday I'm speaking with Greg and Julene about the farmer interview side of things. I know, again, we don't really know. It's just a first meeting to kind of figure out what makes the most sense in terms of data to collect, developing instruments and things. So So that is kind of on the docket too, at least from my side. But once we figure out who the PI is, we can start writing an IRB for that. We don't need the main project proposal written or anything. We just need to write up the human side of it for the IRB. So which should be self-contained in a sense. So,
one thing. Oh, go ahead.
No. So I was just going to say that, yeah. So I agree that with Joe that we should continue the process, even though we don't have the RFA. We should still be revisiting our aims, making sure that it still makes sense. As we're looking at literature, I know as part of the CSRPERB submission for all of us, we're all going to do like literature reviews and things. So I know that should be occurring now anyway. So maybe that's something we can all work on in the meantime. Is kind of brush ourselves up on this topic, at least in your area.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's going to be the hardest thing, is to write the introduction to whatever. We don't need an RFA to write an introduction and to develop the aims.
Yeah,
and that's going. I think that's going to be the tricky part. So I think.
Yeah. So.
Go ahead.
So we can definitely start working on that. Maybe building. I know that you've already put together the shared Google Drive, and now I can edit it with my personal Gmail.
Yeah.
So that's good. And starting to, and I was thinking about adding more literature that are specific to areas into the folders. And right now, anyway, now you have this organized a certain way, but maybe we can start expanding that more, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. So IRB, literature review, and identifying other experts we need and bringing them into the fold earlier would be better.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's quite important. Maybe Franz, sounds like you have someone that could potentially be a good fit. Joe, it sounds like you've got someone. Cord mentioned someone at Cal Poly Pomona. And then I actually think it would benefit us to have somebody from outside the CSU who's like a head honcho in the field. There's actually a guy at JGI who we might think about approaching. I've sat on USDA grant review panels for the past 5 years, and they typically come from Research One institutions. And so having someone from a Research One or a Research Institute will, in some reviewers' mind, lend some gravitas to a proposal that's primarily coming from CSUs.
Yeah.
So maybe we could think about both one or two CSU colleagues, and then maybe one external colleague who's a sort of a world expert in this area.
Yeah. Right. I had mentioned before, but briefly, and it was a long time ago, it must have been weeks ago when we all met in person, that my colleague here that I was alluding to, Dr. Tricia Van Laar, microbiologist, has worked with Jonathan Eisen at Davis.
Yeah.
And I know Jonathan has a big profile in terms of microbiome work. So that might be a fruitful approach, just as an option.
Absolutely.
Something to consider.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Either Eisen or the guy whose name escapes me from JGI. Both are in California. Both are world experts in this stuff. So yes, absolutely. That if we could reach them through a collaborator, as you're saying, that makes it even easier because they're working with a known entity.
Yeah. Let's see. So I think last question from me for now, anyway, and we can keep talking if we need to, of course, would be what do we need to do to bring in someone who hasn't been part of the conversation yet? For example, should we have a pretty solid abstract? We already have an abstract. Is that what we would use to pitch? Here's what we're thinking as a group. Would you please join us?
Yeah, one pager, I think. Maybe not just an abstract, but like a one pager, which lays out, the specific aims. Approaches and target grant opportunity.
Yeah.
Do we have something kind of like that?
We
It
do.
seems like we were working on a two-pager, right? Was what we have, but I think it's still very much rough draft.
Yeah. So I will.
So maybe polishing would be the task.
Yeah. So I'll pull that out of the Google Docs wherever I can find them. I know we have a lot of them going right now, but they're in there somewhere. And that's right. We do need to have, what was it? It was a 2-page something to see Superb by January?
February, I think.
February?
Yeah, February.
It's at the end of February.
So we need to be working on this sort of thing anyway. So if we can get all
Right, but I think that integrates any of the pilot data that we have, and right, I assume as well.
Could by that point, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to. I won't try. I will put together a new Google Doc that will be our 1 or 2-pager that would probably serve both of those purposes to help us recruit new experts in the short term, and then eventually maybe turn into this C-Superb required 1 or 2-pager. There was, what was, oh, they were going to send it to program officers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's what that document was for,
Mm-hmm.
to help us get feedback on the eventual proposal. So yeah, it should serve both purposes. Perfect.
Good.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Take care.
See you on the internet.
Yeah.
Bye all.